Hello folks, I hope you're continuing to enjoy your Halloween season, and I hope that you enjoyed my most recent episode all about the lovely poem from Louise Gluck, All Hallows. I thoroughly enjoyed doing that one. I've had some lovely feedback. I hope that it gave people a sense of the pastoral and the nature sort of imagery associated with Halloween, but also the spooky-ish ending, which I found quite unsettling, which I think is ideal as the first one. So I'm currently in my usual spot again. I had planned to be elsewhere today, but a small humanoid who I live with isn't allowing me to do that right now. But I found my usual spot. It's a really, really beautiful autumn day here. Trees all around me seem to be set afire with reds and oranges, and I've got that nice chill back in the air, which we didn't have just last week. Today's poem is far more fantastical and definitely spooky, but in order to actually record it at the right time and in the right and proper fitting setting, it needs to be done at night. So what you're going to hear over the course of this episode is me as we get closer and closer towards evening, and it will culminate in me reading the poem by moonlight, and possibly, if you're very lucky, I'll tell you about the very spooky encounter I had right here, not all that long ago, which I still can't really explain. Strap in. It's going to get a little bit spooky and demonic around here. It is now dusk. All of the trees to my left kind of look like bony fingers scraping the sky. It's been an incredibly clear day here, and that's given way to a chilly and very beautiful twilight here. It's not quite the sunset because the sun is long gone now. We've just had the clocks change as well. Nobody told me that when you've got a small child, that's really, really tough, because the kid doesn't understand daylight saving and they wake up at what they believe is their normal time. So I've been awake for a very long time today, which might come through in my voice, who knows. But the feeling that I get right now is peak autumn, or at least peak October. The chill has come through, the summer has faded, and it's absolutely glorious. And yet this is still different to even the last 2 weeks where I recorded the All Hallows episode. That felt a bit more on the precipice. This now feels like it's a done deal. Let's talk a little bit about horror. When you think of horror, do you think of ghosts, vampires, werewolves? Or in the more sort of modern age, when we have more knowledge of the world around us, we think of skinwalkers, wendigos, UFOs, black-eyed children. I don't really think many of us think of horror as being limited to the supernatural, because that would be wrong. Plenty of horror in the real world. You've only got to look at the news to see that. But when it comes to a pleasing sort of horror, I think the supernatural has existed for a long time as a construct. Whether you believe in it or not is a debate for another time, because there's something other which we, I think, enjoy on some level. Even if we don't necessarily believe in it, we believe in the idea that it could be there. A lot of this has to do with the primal fear of the dark. Take away the first and most useful of our primary senses, and suddenly you don't really quite know where you are. Although, dear listener, word of warning, this is an entirely audio podcast, so your sense of sight is provided entirely by yours truly. And I assure you I'm telling you the truth when I say that we've just hit the point now where I don't quite need the torch, but it will be a matter of minutes before I do. The dog, thankfully, has his little orange glowing pumpkin round his collar, so I can see him, even if he decides to make a run for it. This time last year, I did actually release a fake horror sort of episode, a horror Halloween episode of my old podcast, Right in the Schoolies, where I'd essentially got bored. I couldn't get guests, and I thought, fuck it, I'll do something a bit different. And it featured me doing a bit like what I'm doing now, but then I was pursued by some sort of witch-like entity throughout the woods. It was a bit naff. I liked the idea of providing people with a bit of a scare on Halloween, but it wasn't really me. I like fiction. I prefer talking about other people's fiction than creating my own. But it got me thinking about all things frightening, and also why we feel fear at this time of year in a sort of, why is it that it gets into our bones a bit? Well, the first thing, like I said, is genuinely, I think, darkness. Darkness elicits fear in human beings. Last time I talked about the more realistic and potentially mundane things like harvest and famine. I think this week I want to focus a bit more on the idea of how we think about threats, things that can frighten us, hurt us. And what if all these things are in one place? What if they were always there, right next to us, and we could not really see them? So before I get to the poem itself, I'm going to talk a little bit about the poet, and somebody not known for the poetry as such, more known for their prose and their sort of mythos. I'm going to talk a little bit about H.P. Lovecraft. Now, full disclosure, Lovecraft, controversial figure for a number of reasons. I am not going to even touch on them right now. The same as if I ever talk about Poe. I won't bother. That is not really my wheelhouse. If you want to politicise someone's work long after they've died due to the beliefs that they held, no problem. You do that. I'm more interested in the work. The person, they're sort of by the by. The sketch that I want to create doesn't always take into account who they were. It's more what they made. Halloween in a suburb. The steeples are white in the wild moonlight, and the trees have a silver glare. Past the chimneys high, see the vampires fly, and the harpies of upper air that flutter and laugh and stare. For the village dead, to the moon outspread, never shone in the sunset's gleam, but grew out of the deep that the dead years keep, where the rivers of madness stream down the gulfs to a pit of dream. A chill wind weaves through the rows of sheaves in the meadows that shimmer pale, and comes to twine where the headstones shine, and the ghouls of the churchyard wail for harvests that fly and fail. Not a breath of the strange grey gods of change that tore from the past its own can quicken this hour when a spectral power spreads sleep o'er the cosmic throne and looses the vast unknown. So here again stretched the vale and plain that moons long forgotten saw, and the dead leap gay in the pallid ray, sprung out of the tomb's black maw, to shake all the world with awe. And all that mourn shall greet forlorn the ugliness and the pest of rows where thick rise the stones and brick, shall some day be with the rest, and brood with the shades unblessed. Then, wild in the dark, let the lemurs bark, and the leprous spires ascend, for new and old, alike in the fold of horror and death are penned for the hands of time to rend. So, I live in a suburb. Very glad it isn't like that one. You'd like to think my house price might change, but I don't know. You never know with these things. Halloween in a suburb. What a great title as well. Before I go into the poem, to talk about the suburban horror is something that I really enjoy. One of my favourite ever horror films will always be the original John Carpenter's Halloween, where our monster, or man, misunderstood man, who is also a monster, Michael Myers, is loose in the suburb of Haddonfield, Illinois. And I'm not going to go into cinematography or sort of, film lore here, because it isn't really my area. If you really want to get into that, by the way, and you are a podcast fan, you need to go away and listen to the Evolution of Horror podcast with Mike Munzer. It's one of my all-time favourite podcasts, superb. Lovecraft's biggest idea, I think, and I'll be honest, I'm not a Lovecraftian. I have a very limited understanding of all of his works. I've read the Shadow over Innsmouth and a couple of Stephen King things that are based around Lovecraft. I haven't even read The Call of Cthulhu, so feel free to come at me, send me an email, tell me how wrong I am. But the concept of Lovecraftian monsters was that there are these entire beings, the old ones, who are greater and more malevolent than we can even imagine, and human consciousness can't even actually see them, like they are so vast and so frightening and so sort of without any mercy that we wouldn't be able to cope with them. So, all of that aside, the sense of cosmic horror is very much what we think of when we think of Lovecraft. But to the poem, and looking at it on its own, in isolation, it's really cleverly written, economical. We have these 5-line stanzas, and the rhyme scheme is really quite clever, actually. I got my year 9s not that long ago to have a crack at imitating this. Taking that internal rhyme in the first line, sort of repeating the rhyme at first, and then finishing it off with this slight adjunct of a 5th line that adds something extra, adds something sort of more frightening, but also a little bit more lingering as a feeling. So we have white and moonlight, and then we have this glare, air, stare, with that 3rd line sort of acting as a standalone. And it's quite cleverly repeated throughout. The village dead to the moon outspread. And if you notice throughout this poem, I'm assuming you're reading along with me, by the way, and if you're not, no problem, you get this repeated idea of madness combined with the supernatural. It isn't bad enough that this suburb is full of ghouls and ghosts and everything else, but it's also full of madness and fear. So Lovecraft writing at this time was sort of, I guess he was a little bit like Poe, a latter day version, really, looking at the idea of madness as well as cosmic horror, moving away from that sort of neo-Gothic, fin de siècle, turn of the century stuff, which is why this thing is quite clever, really, because it is, on its surface, quite old school Gothic. If we just count the number of things we've got vampires, harpies, zombies with the village dead, a bit of the Reanimator in there. If we were to look through other things, the dead leaping out of the tomb's black maw. We even have lemurs pretty bloody frightening as well. And we have the hounds of time to rend. As I read that last line, my hound came charging up to me. It's suddenly got very, very dark here. And it's genuinely so dark that I'm walking along. I have this poem on my phone, but it's having the effect that... Oh, blimey, sorry, that was a dog. That scared me there. That I can't see so well in front of me. I've got the torch sort of shining out. So, fingers crossed, everything is okay. Where was I? Yeah, the imagery in this is quite wonderful. It's very mezzotint almost. I can imagine this sort of carved out, bright moon in the sky, and these angular looking church spires and everything. On one hand, it's quite laughable, it's quite silly, but there's something about it that does have a nice chill to it, and actually some good reference backs to the old All Hallows. Earlier we have sheaves, and we have the idea of the harvest flying or failing. So this is chock full of Halloween and harvest imagery here. And of course we have the cosmic throne, and loose is the vast unknown, these monsters that we can't know. They're too horrible, they're too frightening. So for now we've just got these more sort of everyday sort of entities and revenants right here. In many respects it's kind of like a nightmare, really. It can't be real. It's too much. It's too crazy. It's too eldritch to be real. And that's what I love about not just the poem, but I love about this time of year. It's a time of year for us to be frightened of things that maybe can't be real, while we could be frightened of all the other real things in the world. Being frightened of some ghouls and ghosties seems like child's play in comparison, really. I'm just walking across this little bridge right next to the same little river where I recorded the trees all that time ago, back in summer. Feels like a long time ago now. By moonlight, and certainly by torchlight, it seems completely different. And somewhat worryingly, I can't find the dog. Monty! Where are you, boy? This is not a wind-up. I'm legitimately unable to see him. He's got that light-up collar on. Possibly hiding from me. Going to jump out on me and give me a good old boo at some point soon, I hope. Now feels like a pretty good time to talk about a spooky experience that I had in this exact spot. And actually talking about it now without the dog is beginning to give me the willies, I think. But I'll tell you anyway. So, I was walking on this exact spot not long after we got the dog, a couple of years ago, and it was full dark. Not quite as dark as it is now, but certainly close. And I shining my light around, and I've got this torch where you can narrow the beam and then widen the beam again. It's quite useful for when you need to suddenly see something in the distance, but also quite useful for general walking. And I heard this sort of rustling noise in the bushes, and I shone my light out towards it and sort of zoomed in a bit, and I saw a bloke, or at least I thought it was a bloke, just some sort of face, pale. He stood right there. I'm pointing my torch at it right now, and I've got chills, which aren't actually to do with the weather. I'm really hoping I don't see him again. I'm actually... He's looking right at me, which made it even more stark. And then when I sort of looked again properly, he was gone. Now, I don't for a second believe in ghosts. This area is a dogging hotspot. So I'm told, anyway. I keep turning up here on Fridays and there's no one here, but you know what I mean. It's possible that it could be some person out and about, saw me, saw the light, and then turned away. Could be someone having a wee. I don't know, but it was kind of weird. They weren't didn't seem to be dressed to be a dog walker, which made the whole thing even stranger, I'd say. Oh, I can see a small orange light. Yes, here he is. Here's the silly boy himself. I'm just going to stop recording while I get him back on lead. Annoyingly, trying to get my dog back on lead in the dark is trickier than I thought. You can probably hear this. I'm underneath a giant electricity pylon, not directly underneath, but like pretty close by. I'm just hiding away from him, because sometimes if you hide from him, he'll come and catch you, and then I can put him back on lead. I'm just going to try. It's really weird. I can see the light in the distance. I was expecting it to be moving around. He's a pretty jumpy sort of. He runs a lot as a dog. You know, he's a part German Shepherd, part Lab. He's a bit mad, but I'm just going to approach because his light isn't moving, which is weird. So unless he sat very, very still, which would be a first time ever, a bit confused what's happened here. I'm just going to turn my torch off so I can see in the dark a bit better. Monty? His collar's off. He can't do that himself. He's never done that before. Monty! Where are you, boy? God. Whew. Okay, so it's all okay here. Don't worry, false alarm. So he'd managed to take his own collar off, which he's never done before, ever, and had just charged off into the distance. Thankfully, I was able to track him down. He's a big lump, so when he got near, I was able to sort of grab his harness, which he's still wearing. So yeah, don't do that again, boy. Yeah. So it's now completely full dark, and I really can't see where I'm going. My torch, would you believe, is out of battery. So it started doing that Silent Hill thing of sort of dimming and dimming and dimming until there's nothing there. So now I'm very much walking with the light of Monty's little lantern on his neck. Thank God he's got that, and I'm just sort of trudging behind him, hoping for the best. I'm only about 15 minutes from home, so we should be okay. Feels like an ideal time to talk about all things spooky and Halloween a little bit more, in a bit more detail if I can manage it. I think that we, as human beings, we like to feel a safe sense of fear. We like to feel fear in a situation that we can understand and comprehend. With Lovecraftian sort of horror, the cosmic, the great beyond, it's very much linked with all the other stuff that I was looking at, and in a different way. Think of the sublime, think of the feeling of insignificance. Wordsworth, talking about that mountain peak being too sort of huge for him to really understand what it means, the same as if you looked into the sky and saw these lunatic constellations that didn't make sense. What would you do? Fear is always about the unknown. It's always about what we can't explain, what we don't understand. And you don't have to be a paranormal believer to feel that. We all fear death in some form because we don't know what lies beyond, but we also fear something else. We fear, I think, that evil, and it does exist, in the world. It exists in people. That if good can live on, then why can't evil? It doesn't mean that every single spirit of a dead person is going to be evil or try and hurt you. That's ridiculous. But the idea that we explain away monsters because they're children's fairy tales or they're things which others believe, but we don't really believe in them. Now, no one believes in vampires, really. No one believes in properly the idea that the undead can literally rise out of the graves, like in Michael Jackson's Thriller. We don't believe that stuff because it's too fantastical, but what if you were the first? Or, to put it probably more correctly, what if it was your first ever time seeing something like that? What if others throughout history had seen it, but they hadn't lived to tell the tale? Or had gone mad from what they'd seen? As I walk down this path in front of me, I can just about see the vaguest sense of light. And if towards me what was coming wasn't a fellow dog walker or somebody out taking in the night air, but what if coming towards me was something truly horrible? Something that I couldn't even describe. And if that I shone my torchlight on it, I'd scream and scream and scream. What then? This is the point, I suppose. We humans peddle like a sort of currency, fear, and whatever form it takes. We like the idea of being able to frighten our fellow humans because it's a visceral reaction. You can't fake it. The same as you can't fake laughing. You can't fake being in love. You can't fake a damn good scare. Because you're either frightened or you're not. Thankfully, I'm now approaching the very, very end of the pathway. And I've just got enough juice in my torch to be able to say to you that there's nobody coming my way. There was a close call there for a moment. I did start to wonder what I would do. The dog's no use, he'd lick them to death. But also, ultimately fear is a lack of preparation, a lack of understanding. And I think darkness, and this time of year when the dark rolls in that bit earlier, that's why we feel the way we do. I do hope you've had an enjoyable evening listening to this. Wherever you are, pour yourself something strong. Strong tea, if that's more your thing. Or something properly strong, depending on what you need. Watch some classic horror. And read this poem. I've been the Sketch Poet. Good night, and sleep tight. There we go, boy. I told you we were nearly here. What the fuck? No!